Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our Road Rules 360 episodes, and I'm here with John Burrill. We're on Gubbi Gubbi country in my spare room, the great, fantastic studio. We're continuing on our journey of bicycle riding rules, following the legislation on the TMR's website. And the website URL is www.qld.gov.au/transport/safety/fines/cycling. John has been away for a little while, so...
Yes, I'm back.
You're back? You were away for 6 weeks. I texted you madly, it's raining today, and I thought, he's never going to come back. So yes. I'm super happy to have you back. Yeah, fantastic.
Even though I did arrive on four wheels.
Oh, well, you know, I know. Well, this is the thing. You know, in lots of places, so your son lives in Scandinavia, and, yes, you know, they ride bikes in the middle of winter.
Absolutely, they do. We're
continuing with our journey in the bicycle riding rules, as I said. We're starting today with level crossings. We're going to go on to mobile phones, and if we have enough time, we'll do roundabouts. As usual, I'll be reading the description of the offence, the legislation section, and the fine. Our first one is level crossings we're doing now. Failing to stop at a stop sign at a level crossing, section 121, and that's a fine of $464. Also in the same section is failing to stop at a give-way sign at a level crossing. Same fine, same section. That's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, this is referring to predominantly country-style level crossings where there may not be a boom gate. In other words, all you've got is a line. Sometimes you've got a set of traffic lights of some kind, or just two-way traffic lights, red and green. Sometimes you haven't even got that. Sometimes you just got a give-way sign or a stop sign, and basically as you approach you've got to look, and if there's a train coming you stop.
Yeah, it's pretty horrible.
Yeah, I think negotiating level crossings on a push bike is quite a traumatic thing, or can be, if you suddenly realise you're doing the wrong thing.
The grooves, it's designed so that it's easy for people in cars, but it's not necessarily very easy if you're on a bicycle. No. It can be quite tricky to navigate those spaces, for sure.
And especially when the lines that you're riding over are at an angle. If your approach isn't perpendicular, if you like, or 90 degrees, then that makes it quite treacherous at times. And of course, if your wheel slips in between the rails and the gap, it's pretty awful. You've got to really dig your way out of that situation.
Yeah, and pretty scary. You just lose your bike. You know, if it's between you and your bike, leave
just
your
run.
bike. So be it. So be it. By the way, we are just here to entertain and inform. Yes. You are a retired TMR guy, road rule subject matter expert.
Yes. So everything we say here is just to give a bit of guidance. Don't come to us with any of your legal issues, because we don't have any responsibility. None. We're not giving any advice. We're not giving advice or opinion. We're just giving a bit of a heads up about this is our take on the road rules. Yes. Yours is very extensive, so you've been working at the You were working at the TMR in road rules for what, 10, 15 In road rules for 20 years, for TMR for 25 years.
Yeah, in all sorts of different roles, yes. But road rules is where you ended up, and then you retired about 6 years ago, and we've been playing around in podcast land for about 6 months, I think.
Wow.
So it's been ages.
Time flies when you're having fun.
I tell you, this podcasting gig, it takes a lot more time consuming than it sort of makes out, for sure. As a bike rider, if you're on the road or there's an option to be as a pedestrian, would you recommend to go on the pedestrian barrier side or the road side?
Personally, I would prefer to be on the road, because usually the pedestrian is confronted with, certainly the urban crossings that we come across most of the time would have physical barriers that you have to open, gates to get through as pedestrians, which on a
bicycle becomes pretty clunky and not much fun. And if you're on a big bicycle like a cargo bike or something, it becomes even more difficult to negotiate. So the road, I think, is probably the best place in that.
To anyone designing level crossing
Yes.
barriers, if you want to make it safe for people riding bikes and scooters and all sorts, mobility scooters,
Yep.
or the motorized wheelchairs as they're called, it would be really good to rethink about the current requirements and go, oh, well, we've got a whole lot of new users now who need more space than a simple pedestrian.
Absolutely.
Mum with a pram even,
Yep.
so that's
Yep.
another one with a couple of kids. Definitely could do with a bit more space there. They're so stingy with the allocation to pedestrians.
Especially you get some of these gates that are on a spring. Obviously, if the train's coming, if the lights are red, then the gates lock, so you can't open them.
Yeah.
But once the train's gone, then the locks click off, and you're then stuck with, especially if you're, on a large bicycle of some kind or pushing a pram or whatever, you're stuck with trying to push against the springs on these gates in order to get through.
This is the sort of thing that's really maddening, and I was talking last week with somebody who's in a wheelchair. This sort of idea of ramps and trying to open when you're in a wheelchair and there's a gradient, it's so difficult. Before you're in a wheelchair, you don't realise how difficult it is, and then you're in there and you go, wow, this is really hard. So I would encourage anybody listening to this maybe to spend a week or a day in a wheelchair just to experience what it's like. After my conversation with Michael Wallace, that's the episode this week, we both think it would be amazing if each person spent a day in a wheelchair just to be able to understand, even if it's a motorized one, you don't have to use your physical muscles to do it, but nonetheless to try and navigate the space. I digress. Okay, failing to give way at a give way sign or line at level crossing, so that's section 122 and a fine of $464.
I think they're just covering all their bases here, and different rules for exactly very specific type situations. Failing to give way, the first rules that we just talked about were failing to stop. This is failing to give way, so you can stop, not give way. You can obey the stop part of it and then just carry on through. Silly as that, it captures that.
So the next one is entering a level crossing while warning lights or bells are operating. Section 123, $464 fine. The next one is entering a level crossing while a barrier is closed, closing or opening. Again, section 123, $464. And entering a level crossing while a train is on or entering the crossing. Geez, you'd have to be daft for that, wouldn't you? I've seen everything. Entering a level crossing while a train is approaching and a collision is likely, still in the same section. Entering a level crossing while a crossing or road beyond is blocked. Section 123, fine, $464.
I think most of it is pretty self-evident, self-explanatory. Only a crazy person, I think, would ever sort of go onto a train line or try to cross a train line if there's obviously a train coming. The reason the barriers are down is because a train is coming. Dashcam film of this kind of event is commonplace across the internet. You see all the close calls and sometimes not so close calls.
There's a guy over in Perth who does a lot of stuff about level crossings because who's going to come off best? If you've got a train going at whatever speed or a bicycle, you're not going to come off good. And I think a lot of young guys like to be daredevils or, I'll just make it. But you just trip for a second and you're really in a big pile of poo.
It's been nice in some ways to see a change of culture. I remember when I first came here to Queensland, the moment a boom gate started lifting up, you would see a whole host of cars all trying to go, even though the lights were still flashing. That has changed.
Okay.
Nowadays, generally speaking, people stop and wait, even though there is a physical opportunity for them to continue on because the boom gate is sort of halfway up, but people do stop until the lights stop flashing now. It's a change of culture almost, I think, that's happened over the last 20 or 30 years. It was a common thing.
Yeah.
The moment the gate started to come up, everybody would just chase over, even though the lights were still flashing. So the first 4 or 5 cars through the crossing were still committing the offence because the lights hadn't stopped flashing.
Yes.
I think the other thing to mention as well, particularly northern Queensland and along the coast where there's lots of cane fields, there are loads and loads and loads of cane trains which take the sugar cane from the fields, and oftentimes there is minimal infrastructure around those crossings, sometimes just to give way line or sign, maybe both if you're lucky, or a stop sign or line. The locals know to be very careful, especially during the season, but if you're not a local, it's something that you really need to understand, that you could easily come to grief there if you're not diligent and watching out for the cane trains coming along.
So the next one is failing to leave a level crossing as soon as practicable. That's section 124, again $464.
You should have a zero on the end, some of these, It's crazy. But it is a thing, what we mentioned about the bicycle getting stuck in between the rails is an example. If you do happen to get stuck, then obviously you're contravening this rule by not getting out of there in time or in the manner that you should be doing.
That's for the car drivers, because this is all car legislation that gets used for
right.
bicycles,
And
which is silly. This is what we've discovered in so much of the legislation, is how stupid car legislation is for bicycles. You really need to have separate legislation for bicycles.
Yeah.
So the next one is driver, rider causing damage to rail infrastructure at a railway crossing, and that's section 300D paragraph 1, and that's a fine of 1238. That looks like one of those fake numbers, but it's actually $1,238. And let's do the other one at the same time, which is driver rider causing an obstruction at a level crossing, and that's section 300D paragraph 2, again $1,238. All right, John. This is now just, of course,
this is a funny one.
Of course, we're just here to entertain and inform. We're giving a bit of a heads up about our ideas, but this is not advice.
Well, I mean, the idea of a cyclist deciding, I'm not going to stop at this boom gate, I'm just going to keep going and I'm going to bust through this boom gate, brings me, it is laughable. It's a joke. And I'm not sure, I mean, I suppose if you had a huge heavy bicycle, maybe with a little electric motor on it, you might scratch the boom gate. But this is for cars. This is for cars. I'd be very interested to know how many cyclists have been issued with a ticket for this one.
I reckon it
would be a nice round figure.
I reckon we should get a security camera on every level crossing and every traffic light and just go, did they go through the red? Like, people might go, oh, that's revenue raising, but we're talking about people's lives here, actually. That's the crazy thing.
Yes.
So, okay, causing an obstruction at a level crossing. So a bike rider in the middle of the intersection going, I dare you. What are you like?
This is chicken. Let's play chicken.
Let's play chicken, I guess that is it, You
stand there and you put your hand up like King Canute. Stop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. So that's, all right. We're good on that. That's the end of level crossings. And gee, it's great to have you back.
Yeah.
I have missed you. I was going, he's never coming back. And here you are. Fantastic.
I'm here.
So the next one is mobile phones. So driver use handheld mobile phone bicycle, section 300 paragraph 1. And the fine on that, woohoo, it's a doozy. $1,161. Now, that is just so stupid, because for bicycle riders, what are you going to do? Bing into, I suppose you could go into the car driver, but the car driver is really the responsible one, because they're in the one that kills people. You're not going to kill anybody on a bicycle compared to cars, which is through the roof.
That's it. I mean, these distraction type rules illustrate just how ridiculous it is to have fine parity with motorised vehicles. It's a nonsense, to say that you are as much danger if you happen to have a mobile phone in your hand while riding your bicycle as a truck driver even, or any car driver. You have the potential to do so much more damage if you're in a four-wheel vehicle than when you're on a bicycle. It's a nonsense to have a fine of this level. But having said that, you are still distracted if you've got that phone in your hand. But it's an interesting thing, because you can still have the phone on your vehicle. In other words,
put a phone on a bicycle stand.
Yes, that's right.
And I always think we're all addicted to phones and everything, and I'm no different to that. I try really hard, but gee, wow, I'm as addicted as anybody, and so is my husband. I'm wondering why it's not the phone companies that are being fined. I think this would be a really good fine. Every time a driver is distracted by their phone, I think it's the phone company and the phone app that should be fined for that. And gee, that would change the legislation in about 4 seconds.
Yeah, that would be an interesting scenario. I like your thinking. I'm not sure that's going to happen.
No, I can't see that happening. But really, why is somebody who is an addict responsible for that? I mean, you could say driving under the influence. Should somebody who is an addict, if the alcohol companies or the how you would do that with marijuana supplier, I don't know. If it was alcohol, I think it should be the person who's providing the addictive substance who should be held to
ransom. It's a very interesting parallel, actually, because pubs can get fined, and it's a very significant fine if they continue to supply alcohol to somebody who is obviously drunk. If they're getting more and more and more drunk and out of control, the pub keeps selling alcohol, it's a massive fine, hundreds of thousands of dollars for the pub, or maybe tens of thousands of dollars. I'm not 100% sure on that one, but big fine.
Why can't you, for instance, shut down all the apps except, for instance, maps, where you need the navigation tool because you actually need that, but everything else just gets automatically shut down? I don't see why that's not possible to create that. I mean,
it would be possible.
Yeah, of course it would be.
But it would not be in their interests. Certainly not Samsung and iPhone and all these other companies would be very reluctant to do that.
I reckon Europe would put it in, though. Like, they're really cracking down on tech companies, also car companies. Okay, now we're up to roundabouts. Entering a roundabout from other than the left lane or left side of the road when leaving less than halfway around. That's section 111 paragraph 1. The fine on that is 92. The next one is disobeying a traffic lane arrow on a multi-lane roundabout. Same section 111 paragraph 1, fine 92. So does that make a difference? Because that's the same rule for being on a bicycle to being on a car.
It is.
Like, roundabouts for bicycle riders is just like, you just end up with a death wish, unless it's a really bicycle-friendly roundabout.
Roundabouts are awful for cyclists.
Oh, they're awful.
No
there's one here on Murrayfield Road, which is Station Street, and you'd just be going, wow, if you go into there, you better have your will sorted out, because there's no two ways about it. That's going to be the end of you. If not this time, then the next time for sure. Anything else that we should know about
I think it's interesting to note, even though there is a rule here for cyclists, it's very interesting to also understand that, generally speaking, cyclists can turn right from the left lane, whereas cars can't. But there are times where it becomes illegal for safety reasons for a cyclist to actually do that. Roundabouts are just so tricky for cyclists. Yeah. We get back to this, how bold are you as a cycle rider? Because in my sort of bold cycling days, in inverted commas, if I wanted to turn right at a roundabout, I'd be in the right lane. If it was a multi-lane road, I'd be in the right lane, turning right, using the right lane, going around the roundabout. If you're not so bold, you are allowed to do it, but from the left lane, but you've still got to give way. You're still required to give way to traffic that might be going straight ahead or taking a different exit to you. Very problematic, I'll tell you. So the fines are there. They're only little fines by comparison, because...
That's because you're going to end up dead if you do that half the time. Roundabout designs are notoriously bad for people who aren't in cars.
The next step down from, taking the easy route round a roundabout is to become a pedestrian on a bicycle, if you like, and use the paths. Basically go around the corner into the road to cross the road itself rather than negotiate the roundabout. But if you're turning right, then that means you're probably negotiating at least 2 roads before you get to the place you want to get to, making it so difficult for a cyclist.
And then they wonder why, we've got a health burden, chronic disease burden of $300 billion a year caused by car. I did the sums while you were away, actually. So $300 billion a year, that's the health burden to Australia for cars. Yeah. So that includes collisions, but it also includes diabetes, heart, cancer, anxiety, cognitive decline, all these sorts of things. This is part of it. I was amazed. Exercise like bicycles, walking, that is all part of the transport mode in a way. It's included, but it's externalized from cars, and I think it should be included. Okay, so the next one is failing to signal right when approaching a roundabout and intending to leave more than halfway round. So that's section 113, paragraph 2. Fine is 92 on that one.
This is one of those things where there is a rule that says if you're turning right at a roundabout in a car, you've got to keep your indicator on while you're negotiating that right turn. That would obviously not apply to a cyclist. Can you imagine negotiating one of these big roundabouts and go all the way around it, or at least 3/4 of the way around it, with your right arm stuck out? That's silly. And obviously most bicycles don't have electric signals. For the most part, we're talking about hand signals here, so common sense applies.
I would have thought that would actually be riding a bike dangerously. I don't know if there is legislation on that. Did we already cover that? I can't remember.
Oh, I don't think we have.
I don't think there is.
Yeah,
you're basically
you're
asking
out of control of the vehicle.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a dumb one, and they should change that legislation.
Yep.
All right, and that's part of our advocacy here with this podcast, is to go, this is stupid legislation for bicycle riders, and could somebody please put forward some decent legislation? Okay, the next one is failing to give way to a vehicle when entering a roundabout. That's section 114(1)(a). $464 is the fine on that. The next one, which is failing to give way to a tram when driving in a roundabout, that's section 114(2), and that's $464 as well. What would you like to say about that?
The tram one really isn't very relevant here. Even though we do have trams down on the Gold Coast now, I don't think any of them go across roundabouts, whereas other states and territories that does happen, especially in Victoria. Failing to give way to a cyclist that's already on a roundabout is a very common offence by car drivers. I've seen it so many times, being on group bicycle rides, just communal bicycle rides, and we've been sailing around a roundabout. The next thing you know, it's like we are invisible on the roundabout to a lot of people coming on. It's almost like the fine should be a lot bigger for when a car driver endangers the life of a bicycle rider. Obviously, if you're a bicycle rider and you enter onto the roundabout, failing to give way to a car coming along, it's still an offence, but there's only one person going to come off worse than that. If you fly out in front of a motor vehicle coming around the roundabout, how silly are you? You wouldn't do it.
I was thinking as you were speaking, actually, if you made every roundabout so that you entered, if you changed the speed at a roundabout to be 30 kilometres an hour, I think that would really start to shift safety on that, or even 20 kilometres an hour.
Yeah, depends on the roundabout. I mean, I think roundabouts are designed to deflect traffic in such a way that they automatically slow down to a point where it becomes safe. But
safe for people in cars.
Well, that's it.
But okay, so why don't you make it 10 kilometres an hour? You know, and okay, so you might lose 35 seconds as you go around that roundabout, but it's either 35 seconds and a life, really, isn't it? So I think the next one is failing to ride to the left of a central traffic island on a roundabout. Section 115, paragraph 1, fine is 92.
Well, it's going the wrong way round.
Okay.
You know, you're meant to pass to the, or at least go in an anti-clockwise direction, and if you decide you're going to be very brave and bold,
yeah, well, that's
want to make a right turn, you know. Well, that's close enough and much easier. I could just zoom across here. I'm not going to go round this middle.
On those small roundabouts, though, I think that does make it a little bit, because it's not evident on very small roundabouts, because there's no island in the middle.
Yes,
you've just got a bit of paint. It's almost really a right-hand turn or whatever that you're making.
My understanding is, and you'd need to check with the engineers on this, but those types of mini roundabouts, as they're called, are being discouraged, because they don't really serve any purpose. I think there was a school of thought at one stage that all roundabouts were always safer than any other kind of intersection. That's proven not to be the case. I think these mini roundabouts are probably case in point here. People just don't stick to the rules on them and do the wrong thing. But for a cyclist, it might be a bit tempting just to cut the corner and just turn right when you should be going in a clockwise direction instead of an anti-clockwise direction.
Exactly. It's possible that some people
the
have
other
done
way
that.
round.
So the next one is disobeying a traffic lane arrow when on or leaving a roundabout. Section 116. The fine on that is 123. And just because I want to get through this, because we're sort of close to the end of time here, failing to signal right before changing lanes in a roundabout, section 117, paragraph 2, and the fine on that is $92.
I think self-explanatory. Changing lanes without a signal is important, but one thing I would point out, and this is something that's not very commonly known, there are certain hand signals that are legal requirements. Left turn hand signal is not a legal requirement. You still stick your left hand out if you're changing lanes to the left or if you're turning to the left, but there is no legal requirement to do it. I could give you a long history on how Queensland tried to change that, but we haven't got time to do that now.
Well, it's interesting because I've got my own hand signals that I use, and so from our previous discussion, because we had to re-record this episode because we had noise outside, so we had to re-record this episode. But last time we recorded this episode, you said it was because in a car, if you're in the right-hand side driving, then and you stick your hand out to the left, well, you're still inside the car, nobody can see it.
Exactly.
So that's why it's on the right-hand side. So that's why it's a stupid rule.
Yes.
And then on a bicycle, I obviously, stick my hand out to the left. But I do this thing when I'm on the left hand, when I'm cycling along, where I stick my hand out to the right and I do a sort of a wheel motion. How would you describe that for our listener? Turning in a circle like anti-clockwise or whatever. And that signals to the driver behind me that A, I've seen them, and B, I'm saying it's okay to pass. They get it.
It's an interesting hand signal, and it's used in the UK.
Oh, is that right?
It's in the UK Highway Code, but we don't have any equivalent official hand signal in Australia. Not about Queensland.
Well, let's get that changed.
Yeah.
So we hope our listener is a legislator here.
Look,
and
a left-hand signal for a two-wheeled vehicle of any kind, whether it be, an old motorcycle. A lot of old motorcycles built before a certain year don't have electronic indicators, so you would normally expect to do hand signals to the right and to the left. There's no legal requirement for any kind of left-hand signal on anything.
So what it really shows is that everything is designed around the car, and then anything else kind of gets fitted on around that space.
Absolutely.
And that's crazy because before the Second World War, most people travelled around in another form. And in fact, until probably the 1960s, most people travelled around by another form. And so it's only just all this, legislation that's come in. I read an interesting paper by Margaret Bromelstra yesterday, and it was, instead of talking about road safety, we should be talking about road danger. So reducing road danger. This is really what we're talking about, as opposed to increasing road safety. We don't talk about the roads and their current users, cars, being actually a road danger. And that's a very different lens.
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah. Cool.
Optimists would say that's being pessimistic. We need to look at it from an optimistic, a glass half full perspective. So we look at road safety. But I don't think that works very much anymore these days. I think to actually concentrate on the danger. There's a lot of things that are called traffic calming devices, and they do everything but calm the traffic. All they do is create pinch points, which are unsafe for cyclists. They cause vehicles to do all sorts of crazy things to try and avoid whatever the device has been put there. It's an introduced hazard, and the idea of introducing a hazard, to me, it's just bonkers. I mean, why would you do it? Well, let's get rid of the hazards. Don't add the hazards.
Let's pick that up at another episode, because I think that's a great idea, because I want to see traffic calming things everywhere, because the problem is, what you're saying is, it's the rarity which is the issue. If you had them everywhere, actually, that wouldn't be a hazard, because it would be seen as an expectation. Now we have everything so that basically it's an anomaly. That's what you're saying. All right, we're going to wrap it up there, John.
Okay, good.
Fantastic. We're out of time. It's great. So good having you on the show.
Pleasure to be here.
All right. And for our listener, share the love. That would be amazing. And we will see you next time. We'll be here next week doing... What are we doing? We're doing speeding, stopping and giving way. Stopping, giving way. Maybe we'll do speeding for a big long session, because I've actually got tons of questions about that.
Okay.
All right then. That's it. It's a wrap.
Thank you, Wendy.
Always a pleasure, John. Great to have you here.
Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaroundcabocarfree.com.au.
Get Around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E, there's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.